Welcome to Savvy Business, Life Unscripted, with your host, Christina Rivera, where our guests share their wisdom and valuable business tips, empowering our audience to expand their personal potential.
Hi, Ginni Saraswati. Welcome to Savvy Broadcasting, Life Unscripted. I'm so grateful to have you here today. We're going to talk about some important issues. One I get questions about a lot is business owners ask me, since I've been doing Savvy for 11 years, hey, can you make money out of this? Or can I grow my brand using podcasting? And you've made a thriving business out of being a podcaster and helping other people launch their podcast. But I'd love for you to share, as we go on here, ways in which people can use it for their business, what's best for them to use it, because not always, as we mentioned just before the interview, it's a lot of work. So share with the audience first a little bit about your backstory before we go to all those goodies.
Sure, absolutely. Would love to, Christina. Firstly, thank you for having me on Savvy Broadcasting. It's nice to know that I fall under a somewhat savvy banner in some spheres, but thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. So just a bit of background on me. So I am Ginni Saraswati. That's my name. I was born in Sri Lanka, raised in Australia, and I grew up quite shy and quiet because migrating from Sri Lanka, I was only one of the only brown girls, let's just say, at school. So I did grow up a little bit shy and in my shell. And when I met my best friend in high school, I started to open up a little bit and, it became a little theatrical, dramatic, if you want to say. I did do drama and theatre studies in college, but then I am actually by trade a broadcaster. So I had my own morning breakfast show in Australia for 10 years on and off. And then as a consequence became a podcaster. So it's a little bit about me, but that's kind of the boring stuff. But the fun stuff is I love to drink coffee. It's kind of like a passion of mine. There you go. It's just like, it's the thing that I use to start my day. I'm really obsessed and almost to a fault, like at a creeper level, about people's morning routines. I'm like, what is your morning routine? And people are like, get away from me. Let me have my coffee. I'm like, I want to know how you start your day. So there's a few things about me that are somewhat exciting or disturbing, whichever way you want to look at it.
No, I mean, coffee, I find to be a great way to bring people together, and everyone has it differently. I like mine, like super strong, put hair on your chest type coffee. It's crazy. My husband's like, this is a can of oil. What the heck? But everyone's different in that respect. But, I love that you started in broadcasting. What even drew you to broadcasting in general?
I think it was at the time I was in college, Christina, and I was studying, as I said, I was very dramatic and theatrical. So I was studying performing arts and media studies. So I kind of had TV, theater, and film I was studying it in some way, shape, or form, whether I was performing or actually doing the theoretical work. But I came across the radio station Joy 94.9 on online, and they were offering a course in radio broadcasting. I thought, well, I'm quite interested in this. And I just found it was a really super interesting way to connect with people, but knowing that you're connecting with people, but not actually knowing that you're connecting with them, if that makes sense. Because when you're on radio, you're kind of speaking out to the ethers, right? Yes. You're not actually speaking to a particular person, but there's multiple, potentially hundreds of thousands of people listening. So not getting that immediate, feedback or recognition or response to what you're actually saying, it really does, I guess, in a way, build that muscle of, okay, I want to be really mindful in what I share. I want to be ensure that I'm engaging with people. And when you get messages coming, that's actually a way to kind of, I guess, tweak that muscle. And I guess now in podcasting, that's because there's so many podcasts now, more than we've ever had in the last 5 years. Yeah. That's a muscle that I feel people have to continually refine. Like, how often are you hearing from your audience? What do they want? So that's kind of what made me get into radio. And it kind of became really one of those things that I was a little bit shy to do, because I said before I was a little bit shy to talk, but once I got on the mic, I'm like, this is so much fun. I love the people that I meet. I love the fact that I get to play what music I wanted to play at the time. Yeah. So it was a combination of things, but I think ultimately this is probably also being a coffee lover, because coffee brings people together. So does podcasting, right? In its own way. So good pair.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what's interesting is I think people out there, when I like that you mentioned really getting a pulse on what are the listeners saying, because I think people can forget. They get so wrapped up, and tell me if you've seen this. Oh my gosh, I have only 10 subscribers on YouTube or whatever, or I only have 100 listens. I'm like, listen, there's 100 ears listening to you. If that's what it said, downloaded your audio, you reached actual real live people listening into your podcast that you are talking to. Yeah. And so I don't think people people should negate that. You're actually talking to live human beings and have respect for them. And to, you know, I know one gal, she had reached a little over 1.5 million, and she really built a following where she would engage with them on the other social medias and have these dialogues and find out what's the pulse, what do y'all think about the last episode, and because to really get an idea, what do they even need. For us, we put out a big survey about 2 years ago and said, hey, what are y'all looking for? And they said, we love your interviews, but they're just too long. I'm too busy. I wish they were shorter. So we brought them to 15 minutes because 15, 20 minutes. And it you know, immediately people are like, this is so much better. I can do it on my morning run, you know, my 2-mile run or whatever. So I love that you mentioned that. Now, so many people mentioned they want to build a podcasting fan base for their business or use podcasting in some fashion. When do you think it's the best time to use podcasting to grow a business, and when maybe you should not look into it?
That is a great question, because I've never been asked when shouldn't you use it. When you shouldn't use it, I'm going to make this very clear delineation. So when you shouldn't use it as when you shouldn't start a podcast, let's just say, if your only goal is to make money solely off that podcast, don't start one, because you've got to look at your podcast as if you would look at a marketing strategy, if you want, like a brand awareness vehicle. Now, nowadays, we see things like billboards, T-shirts, TV ads, billboards in particular. Like, let's put TV ads to the side here, but billboards, right? I've had a billboard in Times Square. I'm not saying that for bragging rights, but I'm using this as an example. Still to this day, I don't know how many people actually saw that billboard. I don't know how many people saw that billboard and took action as to what I was actually putting on that billboard. I also don't know how effective that was, right? All I know in that experience is that I had a billboard. That's it. I could take photos of it. When I'm 80, I can tell my grandkids, listen, Granny was on a billboard, you know, you better respect. That's the only value I can see from it right now. Obviously, there is greater value to billboards with brand awareness. But when you look at podcasting, right, like what you said, that example that you used before, Christine, the 100 views, that's 100 people who are like literally, if you think of it this way, having a meeting room and having 100 people in there listening to what you have to say, that's invaluable. Some people have to pay for event space for that. Some people have to get tickets to go see that. But the fact that you have that captive audience, that's such a great point to look at. But going back to your question, because I digress, you said, when is a good time to start a podcast, or when should people look at starting it? If you think of your podcast as a way to connect deeper with your current audience and to also reach a bigger audience, if you look at it in that way, look at it as a marketing vehicle for your brand awareness, look at it as a vehicle to build community, to drive your brand authority. So that's pretty much, you can start it from, you know, get-go. If you know what your business is about, if you know who your clientele is, what questions they ask, then those 2 points are a great point to actually start your podcast from.
Yeah, I love that you're saying that. Early on, I had gotten some calls from people over the years where they said, hey, I want to get a podcast going. How long till I can monetize this puppy? I'm like, no. I mean, for one, and we both know this because we've been doing this a while, the back work to even putting on episodes that are quality and doing it consistently. Because that's, I mean, people want to see consistent. They're just going to go off and be like, we don't know when to depend on listening to your content, so we're just not going to come on by. So it's got to be consistent. It's got to be quality. And that takes work.
100%. And this is, you've touched on a really good point here, Christina, because when it comes to podcasting, you know, you've got to show up every day, one, for yourself, one, for your audience, and secondly, just for your business, right? That takes discipline and work. So the discipline of podcasting is often not talked about. People focus on, how do I grow it? How do I make money? How do I put out cool content? But there is a discipline piece to it. And it sounds super boring. You're like, oh God, I got to be disciplined, like releasing podcasts. You do, because you're using it as a vehicle, like what you said, to build trust with your audience. And when you have trust, then you have the power to influence. So it's kind of a two-way street. You've got to look at it as, what can I commit to? Like, if you can commit to something, you know, for 6 months of the year, if you can release a podcast for that amount of time, then you know, okay, that's when I'm going to start putting out episodes for this 6-month period.
Yeah. And you mentioned something else very important. You said, what questions are, well, hopefully you know who your target audience is, and that you're actually know how to connect with them, and you are connecting with them, but they're asking you specific questions. And how might you or your guests come to the table and answer those questions or bring value to your clients or potential clients? And I think if you come from that viewpoint, that strategy, you'll be helping your clients, and in the long run will ultimately build your fan base.
This is a great point that you raised here, because this is what I think business owners, they're so in the grind of work. So say, for example, you have a coaching business and you're coaching a specific niche of, say you're coaching women executives or C-suite level women identifying individuals. Let's just say that is your coaching base market. Let's just say that's your market. Chances are your podcast, if you're going to want to drive a direct form of revenue into that business, your audience is going to be C-suite executive level women identifying individuals. So in your customer base, like what you said, Christina, the questions they ask you frequently, the pain points they experience, what's on their mind, what they care about, the information is all there. I think where business owners need to make a shift from, or in this case, a coach needs to make a shift from how do I be a coach to how do I be a podcaster, is flipping it on, okay, there's content, there's the episodes. Like you could make an episode out of a most commonly asked question to your fan base, right? And then you will attract more of your fan base because they will be out there too. So that's kind of the shift that I feel people kind of find it hard to make, because if you're in that mode of I have a business, you think about selling your product, not actually talking about what your customers care about, think about, worry about.
Yeah. And also whether you are actually selling, because I think there's that icky thing that people think, oh, selling, I have to push my product. Yeah. And the same goes with either your product, service, or information and your podcast. If you come from the standpoint of value, you can't go wrong, because either way, whether you make a sale or get a listener, you're presenting value and it will hit someone that needs it and ultimately could, in the long run, turn into a long-lasting listener or potential client.
Exactly. And I think that's a great way to put it, because even if you don't get a direct listener converting into a client, the fact that you have a podcast that's out there, that's being shared around communities, in the circles that your clients roll in, there will be some form of ROI that comes to you that you might not be able to quantify in that moment. But the fact is you have a solid product that you've been consistent on. And that's very attractive to people, that you've got a media library of things out there, of content about yourself, of information about your services, in a way that it's kind of like, oh, this is kind of an entree before I can purchase the main course.
Exactly. In fact, that's happened for me. I've listened to a coach. He's now my coach, but for years I listened to his podcast, and he gave so much value to me before one day I decided, hey, I think we need to make this a go and work together. But let's talk about something else I think is very important. And that is brand. I've talked to some people who decide I'm going to do a podcast, and it turns out to be a podcast about everything. Really no kind of direction that you could say this ties into their company brand. Like, what does this have to do with what they're selling or all about? And I think some people can get off in the bushes without realizing, okay, what is your initial reason for starting this podcast? What are the number one questions your client is asking? And are you really hitting with the way you put your podcast out, look and feel to your brand?
Yeah. So I guess the question that you're asking there, Christina, is what do you start with when you're starting a podcast? What's a successful framework? So to your point, starting a podcast about everything, way too broad. I mean, that's great if you want to make it about everything. But if you say it's about everything, starting with that is going to be too wide. If you want to say it's a podcast about current events that encompasses everything, maybe even start with it's a podcast about current events and my opinion on these current events. That already, as you can see, has narrowed down the everythingness of that podcast, right? Yeah. So when you're creating a podcast, think about, okay, what do I actually want to speak about? And be specific. I had a client come to me the other day. I'll give you a real-time example. He said to me, I want to do a podcast on news, sports, politics, and my opinions. And I'm like, okay, so you want to do a current events podcast? Your topics are going to be around news, sports, and politics, but it's a news podcast and it's an opinion podcast. He's like, yeah, that's what I want. See how it's just completely narrowed it down, right? And then the next step is think about your audience. Now, people say to me, okay, I've got a business podcast. I'm targeting entrepreneurs. Again, too broad. That falls into the everything bucket. If you want to target entrepreneurs who are high performing, who are women identifying individuals, who are burnt out at work, see how that's completely narrowed down that kind of entrepreneur. So you're very clear on who you're speaking to. So a framework, and a podcaster named Kevin Schmidlin, I think that's his name, he teaches this too. It's people who something. So again, female entrepreneurs who are high achieving individuals who feel burnt out due to their work. See how it's very, very specific. So that's kind of the second step. And then the third step is think about the cadence. Again, I said this before about the discipline and the trust element, right?
Yeah.
This is very important. People kind of are very flippant about it, but think about it. Can you commit to weekly? Can you do every other week? How long can you do this for? Because when you say that episode is out, it has to be out. Otherwise, you lose trust with your listeners. So that's another thing to think about. And also think about, in that mind frame of cadence, think about, is it going to be a solo podcast? Are you going to have guests? Are you going to do both guests and solo episodes? These things will really help shape how realistic this is to come into fruition.
Yeah.
So they're kind of the three things I suggest for people to think about: cadence, type of show, and who you're talking to.
Yeah. And just really briefly, let's touch on the time aspect of it, because let's say you're going to do a guest podcast. You really don't have much of, you don't know who to reach out to. You think maybe a few clients of yours. There is that background work and also reaching out to the people, setting up the interviews. All of that is time constraints. You'll have to add to your calendar when you make the decision, is this going to be a go for us?
That's actually a very good point too, because some people are like, oh, I want to host a podcast with my best friend. We've got lots of things to talk about and we want to have a guest. Great. Like, if you have that kind of banter with your best friend, I'd love to do a podcast with my best friend, but it would never work because I know, one, she's on a different time zone. Secondly, she's a full-time working mum of two. Thirdly, we're just not going to make it happen. But things like that, if you have a co-host, just coordinating two schedules can be super difficult. And then coordinating a third person, like a guest on top of that, it can be quite challenging. So just keep that in mind, but also keep in mind things like, again, the time that into researching the content, the time into editing the content, the show notes, how are you going to promote the podcast? How are you going to distribute it? Like, do you have to learn these things? Are you going to outsource it? So these are things that you really need to have a good think about. And people are like, oh, I just want it one and done. And I think sometimes we forget to exercise that patience. It's like, we really need to think about, hey, how can I make this happen?
Yeah, and all great things, even like your business, was not overnight. You did a lot of work to build to where you are today. And on that note, I'd love for people to hear more about what you offer, because you offer a one and done and different options for podcasters or people who want to get out there and get a podcast going. Share a little bit about that.
Sure. Thank you, Christina. So Ginni Media was a company that I found in a consequence of being a podcaster. And when I started my podcast in 2016, I had these same things when I was thinking about it. I'm like, oh gosh, I can't audio edit. I can't write show notes. What I can't do, I had to figure that out and learn it. But at that time, I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I could outsource everything to multiple people or just one person to take care of it? So I kind of put myself in the experience of being a podcaster, because one, I did it. And secondly, it was like, okay, what can make this process easier? So Ginni Media, I founded, and we pretty much are a one and done solution for your podcast. You come to us with your podcast concept and we'll help you plan the strategy, the launch, your episode arc, and we literally take care of everything for you, from recording to distribution, so to publishing it on the app. So we'll do your audio editing, your show notes, your artwork that you can use on social to promote, and we'll pop it up on the apps for you as well. So we just want you to focus on what you're good at, which is your business knowledge, whatever you're sharing in your field of expertise. So that's essentially what we do at Ginni Media.
Yeah. And I think I also saw that you do kind of a la carte as well. If you don't want it from one and done, you could offer, like, if you need one piece of the puzzle done, you guys can do that too.
Absolutely. So if you want to come to us saying, hey, we just want you to do our artwork and distribution, we'll be like, sure, we can do that for you. We just find that people, when they come to us for a little bit, they'll come and ask for the other, the few other pieces as well. So we really love being in this space, because audio media these days is so exciting, and you know, the future of it, and how people are getting so excited, and everybody's getting a podcast from what it looks like. Really isn't everybody, but that's another discussion.
Now, tell me, do you think, I was hearing a couple of years ago that video is really the storm. I hear they're going back more to audio because people are so busy. They just want to be on the run. They don't really need to look at people's faces.
Yeah, see, I've had mixed reports too, because now video podcasting is up, but I don't know if that's because podcasting's been so adopted by people that they love the visual element as an option. That I think will take some time to realize. I know YouTube and Spotify are doing really well with the video element of podcasting. I think audio, given your point, Christina, the fact it allows you to manipulate your own time. So you can be autonomous with the decisions you make as to when you listen to it and what you do while you're consuming that information. So I do think audio is the space that can only allow that. It is the only space that allows that, because you can't read a book and drive, although some people do, and you can't watch a video and drive, although some people do, but you can listen to a podcast and drive and do it safely.
Please don't do that, people. Don't be watching us while you're driving. But I loved having you out here today. It was such a wonderful conversation. I hope we get to meet in person one day, but I want everyone to find out how they can get their podcast going with Ginni Media. Share with them how they can do that.
Absolutely. So just go on over to our website, ginnimedia.com, and there's a page there where you can contact us. You can also see the podcast we've produced, so you know that we do indeed walk the talk. We've got a team all around the world in 16 different countries, so we're very excited to meet all of you should you come our way.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ginni, for coming today to Savvy Broadcasting and sharing your great wisdom on podcasting. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. It's been so much fun.
Like, subscribe, and share this episode. To listen to more savvy episodes and savvy biz tips, go to www.lifeunscriptedradio.com. To find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or how to become a guest, email Christina at lifeunscriptedradio.com.